Today we're going to be talking about Afghanistan and whether the world's suffering is relevant to God and how God kind of works within suffering. It's really wonderful to see you. I'm glad that you're kind of taking on this food. Please just kind of grab as much as you want. Today I'll be interviewing Jim. And Jim, would you like to explain a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my accent's a little bit Canadian, in case you wonder where I'm from. A lot of people think it's Irish. I was born in Wales, and live in Cardiff at the moment, and I was many moons ago here as a student in Aberystwyth University. And I know Mary's mother, who's here as well, and also her father. So yeah, I've got my boy Caleb, just at the back there, he's there. My wife is from the East African country of Eritrea, and I work for an organisation called Open Doors, which supports Christians around the world.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So I'm just going to be asking a few questions, and then I'll leave it over to you. So the first question is, why is and why has Afghanistan been in the news?
If we were to cast our mind back to August last year and watching the news or looking on social media, we see pictures of planes taking off from Afghanistan and Afghan nationals desperately trying to get on those planes. We also saw pictures of desperate mothers trying to pass their babies over to soldiers, American soldiers, other soldiers, in order to give them what they thought would be a chance of a better life. So the context of why Afghanistan has been in the news in recent months was the rapid rise of the Taliban and to become de facto rulers of the country. Taliban have been in the country for many, many years, but America last May decided to take their troops out of the country, 2,500 troops. And this left a power vacuum. There was a government there, but it was perceived as a puppet government supported by foreign powers. And so the Taliban began to advance, and people never expected the group, which was an Islamist government wanting to re-establish Sharia in the country, but within a few months they took over the country. And I just think it was something very fearful for a lot of people.
Yeah. So the next question is, how and who are suffering?
So I'd just like to focus on two groups. I think looking at women and religious minorities. So one of the areas in which we've seen suffering is the rights of women in Afghanistan. In particular, we've seen in the imposition of Sharia, the Islamic law, we've seen women of a certain age not being able to attend education, have education, and also, by and large, women not being able to continue in their work. So this has been, very, very difficult for so many people. They've often, their money income that's come into the household has often enabled them to live and eke out a living. So that's been really challenging. And also, religious minorities. So my organization, we have a focus on Christians who are being persecuted and discriminated against. But in Afghanistan, it is not just Christians. There's Jews and Shia Muslims also suffer a lot. The last Jew left Afghanistan late last year, and at one point there's 50,000 Jews in Afghanistan. Shia Muslims are also they've continuously been harassed and intimidated and persecuted by the Taliban over the years. But Christians, yes, it's difficult. There's at the turn of the century, there's perhaps only about 50 to 100 Christians in the country, but now there's estimated to be about 5,000 to 8,000. And but predominantly they're either they or their parents are from a Muslim background, and that means that they're particularly susceptible. And if they're discovered, they would be killed, or they'd have to flee right away. So there's not a lot of tolerance for them. So it's not a visible church; it's an invisible church.
Wow. So the question is, are world issues relevant to God's? So we've heard about about people suffering, and it is awful. But how would you say God is working in Afghanistan? Do you have any specific examples?
Yeah. So and just in a sense, fleshing things out a little bit more. Before the recent rise of the Taliban, you could say the enemy of Christians were wider family, and that would be other minorities as well, perhaps if they were from a different faith or something, where you have to be very careful what you said. But now with the rise of the Taliban, it's also the government now, this sort of strict, austere interpretation of Islam. So how is God moving? Well, it's led to a fresh openness, where there was a young Christian who, before the recent rise of the Taliban, would talk about his faith in Jesus to his friends, and by and large they wouldn't be interested. But now they're calling him, they're wanting to find out more about Jesus, more about the Bible. And also it's created a lot of hunger and searching for something. And there's an Afghan church pastor living outside of Afghanistan. He holds a regular virtual online meeting. And he said that 90 to 95% of the people that take part in that from within Afghanistan are themselves not self-identified as Christians. They're seeking something, they're looking for something, but they're wanting to take part in these discussions. Yeah.
I think you have a video to show us. So in that video, she's asked us to be aware of her pain, Christian pain. I was wondering if you would be able to expand upon what she says. Like, how are Christians suffering in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so they're desperately in need of food, clothing, of warmth, heating, and they don't have freedom of religion. I mean, that applies, across the board to many people. But there's a resilience in their hearts. They want to continue, and I think you can't underestimate the strength and the encouragement that it is by being connected to, in this case, to the church from outside of the country, and people getting in, wishes and wanting to support them and pray for them and make them know that they don't feel alone. The organization that I work for, it was started a number of years ago by a Dutch Christian, and he visited the what was then countries of the Iron Curtain, and first of all he went to a communist youth rally in Poland. And he was just curious. He didn't know much about what was going on there. And he met Christians that, by and large, they weren't able to buy Bibles. And they were so encouraged by his presence. They said, we were made to feel that we're not alone. And so that thing about being encouraged by other people, I mean, we're not always able to see people face to face, but nowadays we can send letters and maybe even emails or phone calls. And so we're doing that, we really try to, because that does give a lot of encouragement. And a problem shared is a problem halved. But there is a resilience there, and faith has come alive, you realize when you're in that situation, well, actually I believe this, and I'm not going to give up on my faith because I believe in Jesus. I'm going to carry on.
Yeah. Christians within this country have comparatively little amount of hardship in comparison to Christians within Afghanistan. So I guess speak to us, why do people maintain their faith? What is it about faith that means that they carry on despite the suffering that they encounter?
I think in this country it can be so easy to have our lives filled with other things. It's great coming here. It reminded me of my student life, and my son, he's sort of seeing it as well. It's making him want to come to university as well. It's not just the course, it's the social aspect, joining different societies and exploring different interests. But a lot of other Christians, including many who are in jail around the world, they don't have that luxury, so they realize that there is that faith. And I think Jesus makes himself very real to people in that situation when they choose to continue in their faith. And there's an element of faith, the reality of God, that I think I don't realize on a day-to-day basis that it is there, and when we're in that situation, sometimes we sink or swim, isn't it? And it's like when people come to university, some people come from a church background and they continue in the faith, but you're faced with a choice, isn't it? But when you take that step toward God, I think he comes toward us, and we have that reality of faith, the living faith in Jesus.
That is a brilliant point, and it leads rather naturally into my next one. Does God care? I think you've begun to answer it, but if you could expand upon it.
Yeah, well, I think I know he does care, and I think two hooks that I would sort of say are ones through which we can understand God's care for Afghanistan is you're looking at compassion and justice. I think God has compassion for the world, for people suffering, compassion for the poor. There's verses about that throughout the Bible. And suffering itself is a problem. We don't understand why does God allow suffering. It doesn't make sense to us, but at the same time, we know that God cares for the poor. So that is one thing. So he cares for Afghanistan in that sense, what people are going through. There's perhaps 200,000 people this winter that are suffering, facing starvation, because you don't have enough food. God cares for those people. And also justice. I think when we think of women being deprived the right of education, the right of, we believe Christians to practice their faith, but also you could say of other groups to practice their faith. That's an issue of justice, and there's some Christian groups that will advocate, will lobby for that right for people to be able to practice their faith, because it's as a universal right.
Brilliant. So, considering your experiences in the field of like looking abroad with compassion, what is the response? How are people responding to Afghan suffering?
Well, at the moment, a lot of it is immediate, where it's emergency aid, really, that if people don't get food, they might get, they might starve, or freeze to death because of cold. So part of it is being able to get food to people and goods to people, and that requires having connections, because you want to be able to work with people you can trust. So my organization, other organizations do have people on the ground that they've known for years, perhaps living outside of Afghanistan, but who have connections inside. So that's important. But longer term, we want to help maybe people develop businesses through microfinance, maybe small taxing businesses, stuff like that. And there's also, other Christian groups that will focus on providing training for church leaders, making sure they have understanding of the Christian faith. So there's a wide range, but I think we need to respond to the immediate need, but also be thinking long term as well, and asking how can we support the Christians in Afghanistan, but how can we support people in Afghanistan as well?
Yeah, I mean, you speak about food being provided, and that is really important. But you also speak about church leaders being provided. Why is that important? Why are church leaders important going into Afghanistan?
Well, we do have the Christian faith. It's not easy all the time. Sometimes we need people to be able to have the luxury of being, you could say, of being able to delve deeper into issues and be able to provide understanding. The question of suffering, for example. Why does God allow suffering? That's certainly not something that I can sort of think about for 5 minutes and come up with a definitive answer. But you need people to be able to engage with these issues, and I think connecting with theologians, people who've given thought to some of these issues, the understanding of what it is to be a Christian, how to grow as a Christian. I think that's important, because people in Afghanistan haven't been able to manifest their faith, you could say. It's been a secret church, so they've been deprived of all that we can learn in the West and other countries through meeting together and corporate worship and teaching. And there's such a dynamic that occurs in those contexts by which people can learn, and people have been deprived of that. So there's a vacuum and a need.
So we've seen the inspirational faith of the woman in the video. Are there any other examples of people's faith helping them through suffering?
Well, just the general about the people sharing, I suppose, sharing their faith, and finding that people are more open nowadays. We see a lot of resilience. We're having to go through quite a long process to get stories, because of the security issues are so tight. We can't just sort of talk to someone and then put their stories on a sort of on social media, or sort of talk about it publicly. But we do see sort of growth and encouragement and resilience in the church there, and wanting to go forward, but really being in need. And they're wanting us who have freedom to be able to pray for them, advocate on their behalf, and see what we can do. Yeah,
that's brilliant. I don't have any other questions. If there are any other points that you wish to talk about, you've got a free floor.
I was just one thing I was thinking of as well. When the Taliban did come over, there was a real impact on women's rights and also religious minorities. But also the joy that was lost. There was a Christian in Afghanistan who ran a sort of carpet business, and the Taliban issued edicts that meant that he was no longer able to continue in his business because there was too much colour or it didn't represent the right sort of patterns. And we saw this in the news where mannequins in clothing shops, their heads were taken off. Such an austere version. And somebody was saying that recently, a few months ago, that Afghanistan played Scotland. I think it was in Scotland in a cricket match, and when the Afghan national anthem is being played, you can see one of the players in tears, crying. And I think, sorry for that, but just how much, things like that we might not think is the most important, but how much happiness it can give to us. Maybe you're going through a time when there's not much to look forward to. Just maybe following a sports team or having little interest on the side can make a huge difference in our lives. So I think that has been taken away from the people of Afghanistan as well.
So, I said that it was my last question, but I'm going to ask anyway. How does so I think we have established that God does care about the suffering of Afghan people. How does God provide joy? Well,
I think there are different dimensions to that. I think there's ultimately, there's a satisfaction, I think, spiritually that we can have through being connected with Christ, with Jesus, and with the Christian faith. But there's also, through fellowship, through community, and we're not meant to be alone, and just being able to talk with others. I think that brings an element of whether it's joy or just sort of contentment, satisfaction in life. But being able to be ourselves as well is important, isn't it? And being in an environment where we don't have to sort of hide who we are, I think that's really healthy. So, yeah.
And people are having to hide their faith, which is pretty awesome. I think that's everything from me. Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate you answering the questions.
And can I just share? We had in our family recently. There was a slightly wider family, but somebody passed away rather suddenly, and she was in her 50s. It was unexpected, and we've been grieving. It was no one had expected it. It was, they said, heart attack, but. Despite those feelings of pain, that it was a sister-in-law that was separated from my brother, but very close to the family. But at the same time, she was really living close to God in Christian life, and she completely turned her life around. And she previously had a lot of addictions and stuff, and really sorted her life out. And so I feel that sometimes, although there's that pain that I'm going through, a sort of a happiness. I believe it where she's spending eternity, and that's something that it's not something I can make myself feel. It's just something, and other members of the family said the same thing. It's just such an amazing thing what happened to her in her life, and so there is that pain, there is that grieving, but at the same time, almost feelings of joy, at the life that she lived and where she is right now.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.